Will you join me in prayer? God, we give you thanks for this morning. We give you thanks for all of the ways that you are speaking to us and all of the ways that you call us to worship. God, open our ears and open our hearts. Allow us to experience you this day. God, we are grateful that you have brought us here. We are grateful for this community. Amen. Last week we talked all about being invited to a party, right? There was a party that was being thrown, and there was some question about who was in and who was out, who should actually be there. And this morning, the party kind of continues. But this morning, the story begins, and there's some question about if Jesus, who is at this dinner, was actually supposed to be there. And not supposed to be there like, did he have an invitation? But supposed to be there like, did the host really want him there? The host, Simon, is a Pharisee. And this is where the scandal of this story begins. Right before this passage in the Gospel of Luke, we hear that Jesus is being called a glutton, a drunk, and a friend of tax collectors. That is the word that is spreading about Jesus. Some do believe that he is the Son of God, and some are celebrating that, but others are not too thrilled. Others don't believe that he is a prophet and believe that he is a glutton, a drunk, and a friend of tax collectors. So why would these people who are spreading awful things about Jesus invite him to dinner? We don't really know. And we don't get the backstory of why Jesus said yes to this dinner invitation. But here we are. Dinner is being served, and Jesus has taken his place at the table. We don't get any details about how dinner is going or the conversation that is taking place when a woman walks in. A woman who is unnamed. Because let's be real, most women in the Bible remain unnamed. Their names were not seen as important enough to include in the narrative. She is just simply a woman. This woman without a name. We don't know a whole lot about her, but right in the beginning of the story, we get the title that she is a sinner. She is a sinner who has come in, and she sits behind Jesus at his feet. Picture the scene, a group of people gathered around a table, kind of lounging, and so their feet would have been behind them, right, as they are leaning forward towards the table. And she is at his feet, and she begins to cry. And not just to cry in the quiet kind of way where you don't really know that the person is crying, but she is crying to the point that Jesus' feet become wet with her tears. She is crying, and she is touching his feet, and her hair is down, and her hair dries his feet. Then she begins kissing his feet, and then anointing them with oil. If dinner was not already a little awkward, it is now, right? It's awkward. Who is this woman? What is she doing? And not only who is she and what is she doing, but she has just broken all kinds of cultural rules. As far as we know, she does not have an invitation to this dinner. But she shows up when she learns that Jesus is there. Again, the one thing we really know about her from the Pharisees is that she is a sinner. So a sinner has just entered the house and has just touched Jesus, who even if the Pharisees didn't really like Jesus, touching him and especially touching his feet would have not been okay. Not only is she touching his feet, but her hair is down. Her hair, which in first century world would have been up and would have been covered, is down. Not only is her hair down, but now it is her hair that is drying and touching his feet. Do you see how crazy this story is? And we are only at the beginning. Imagine that you are Simon, the host of this dinner. Here is this guest who you don't really like, who now has this woman who you really don't like, who is all over him. If you are Simon and the other guests, you are likely thinking that this woman is trying to seduce Jesus. Her touching, her hair, her status as a sinner, you are likely looking and imagining that she is here for something other than praise and worship. Because this story begins in all kinds of scandal. And there are no words exchanged between Jesus and this woman in all of this. All of this takes place, and it is not until Simon and Jesus speak that we get any words. But the woman's actions do speak volumes. Jesus, and we believe that Jesus knows what is actually going on here. You see, with every part of who she is, in body and in spirit, this woman has just said, I know who you are. I know that you are Jesus, Son of God. I know what you can do, and I am coming to you sorry and in need of you. With every part of her body, even parts of her body that the Pharisees would have said were not acceptable, this woman bows down for worship. And it is Simon who speaks first. Simon says, if this man were actually a prophet, he would have known who this woman is and what kind of woman she is, and he would not allow her to be touching him. She is a sinner. What is this guy doing? And Jesus answers him, but not with a direct answer, but with a parable. This parable of a story of generous forgiveness. Without saying so directly, Jesus names that he knows this woman. He knows the extent of her own sin, and he knows that she is already forgiven. It is after Jesus shares this parable that he finally turns to the woman. Right? We started with the woman is at his feet, and he is reclining at the table, so most likely he would have been facing the Pharisees this whole time. And so he turns to the woman, and yet he doesn't speak to her yet, but he speaks to Simon. And to Simon he says, do you see this woman? Do you actually see her? Not just what she is doing, but do you see her? Do you see her humanity? Do you see that she is weeping like her life depends upon it? Do you see that she has come not worried about what any of you around the table think, but knowing what she needs to do? Do you see her? Or are you looking away? Are you ignoring this discomfort, this awkward situation that is right in front of you? Because if the Pharisees see her, it means they also have to see Jesus. Remember where we started this scripture. Jesus is this unwelcome guest. And so if Simon sees the woman, it means that he also has to acknowledge that Jesus is worth worshiping. That Jesus is worth doing all that would have been seen as unacceptable. Simon doesn't think that Jesus can possibly be the Son of God. And not only has Simon ignored that Jesus might be Son of God, but Simon did not even treat him with dignity and respect that would have been given to everyone else around the table when he entered. Simon did not welcome him or give him water for his feet. He didn't greet him with a kiss or anoint him with oil. There's no signs of hospitality, even acknowledging any part of who Jesus is. He hasn't really welcomed him at all. So if Simon acknowledges this woman, he also has to acknowledge Jesus and all that he failed to do when Jesus walked into the room. But if Simon keeps both of them at a distance, maybe this whole situation won't have any effect on him. Maybe if Simon pretends not to see her or not to see Jesus, he can forget all about this awkward dinner, and they can all go home at the end of the night, and that will be the end of the story. But the first thing that Jesus addresses to him is, do you see her? Jesus calls Simon to see her. And in this moment of question, Simon needs to decide if he is going to let these two into his heart or to ignore the situation. I can imagine that this wrestling is going on when Jesus takes the situation to a whole other level. Jesus then speaks to everyone at the table, and he reveals that this woman who they have named as a sinner, her sins were already forgiven before she even walked in the room. And it is as a forgiven woman that she will leave this table. Forgiveness is what brought her here and what is going to lead her out. It is the forgiveness that allowed her to respond with this generous hospitality. She has seen Jesus. She knows who he is, and she's not afraid to live into that reality. She's not afraid to respond with generosity that everyone else around the table sees as foolish. She embraces her body, and she uses her body for praise and worship. She stops hiding it. She stops listening to the rules of society that says that she is unworthy. She is bold in her love. She enters this space where she is not accepted, and she finds the person that she came to find. The person who has already given her new life. As far as we know, this woman and Jesus have not had any encounters before. But she comes simply from hearing the stories about who Jesus is and all that others are claiming him to be, and she comes and she kneels at his feet and she lets down her hair and she embraces her tears. She offers oil, an extravagant gift, and she embraces who Jesus is and who she is. She knows her identity, and she is no longer ashamed. The whole thing, all of it is crazy. And yet it is this unnamed woman that we are called to be like. It is this unnamed woman who has given us an example of what it means to be a disciple, to follow boldly, not afraid of what anyone else around the table is going to think. To follow how we are being called, even if others call us crazy. So what if this week we tried to be a little more like this unnamed woman? What if we stopped believing that our bodies are a source of shame and instead believe that they are a source of love and of worship? What if we really saw ourselves as created in the image of God, and not just in theory, not just in something that we say over and over again, but what if we actually practice that? Practiced living into our being created in the image of God. Can you imagine? I don't know if I fully can imagine, because this kind of living requires a crazy shift from what our culture tells us. It requires us to go against the norm. It requires us to stop and to see ourselves as forgiven, and then out of that forgiveness to really worship. To worship with boldness, not afraid of what others will say or who will judge us, but to worship with all of who we are, with our minds and our spirits and our bodies. Are we willing to risk our comfort and security to live in a new and bold way? Are we really willing to follow, to be a disciple? You see, Jesus never said that it would be easy. He warned his followers time and time again, the world is not going to get it, and you are going to be judged, and awful things are going to be said about you, but take heart because they've said them about me first. It's going to be hard. But at the end of this passage, Jesus affirms that it will be worth it. Jesus affirms that this woman has been forgiven, and he sends her off in peace. Peace not to be worried about the men who are gathered around that table. Peace not to be worried about what they are going to say about her. Peace not to be worried that they have just seen her hair. Peace that she is known and that she is forgiven. That Jesus sees her and calls her beloved. This is how we are to worship. To worship like this woman and to go in peace, knowing that Jesus sees us and calls us and forgives us and names us beloved. That is worth celebrating. Thanks be to God. Amen.